Anatole France, I probably butchered that, said, "The law, in its majestic equality, forbids the rich as well as the poor to beg in the streets, to sleep under bridges, and to steal bread. Equality of opportunity is useless if it does not produce equality of outcomes. We also need to change minds, not just laws. Little girls are being shot in the head for trying to go to school."
Okay, again, this may be true, but that's around the world. That is not in the West. We are not talking about in places where girls can't go to school. We're talking about the West. Keep your focus on the West.
It's not enough just to make shooting people in the head a crime. We also have to convince people that girls are entitled to an education without being shot in the head.
Okay, this is actually also a valid point because, again, there are countries where people genuinely believe that girls shouldn't get an education, and that's a shame, and it's true that, we need to educate people so that they don't hold those sorts of harmful beliefs. I know I sound like a SJW here, but yeah, it's true that there are definitely some beliefs that are still held that are very sexist. There are still some very sexist people, and it's true that that's a problem, especially in countries where sexism is a big issue. So yeah, I agree that it needs to change, but again, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the West. Why are you not focusing on the West?
Otherwise, it will continue to happen. But when I would talk about this, a friend used an analogy of it's better to not get involved in these wars because all you get is collateral damage. Yeah, don't take a position on issues of equality because you might, have to suffer the consequences of standing up for what's right. Talking about the culture, ideology, argument, whatever you want to call it, wars going on between things like feminists and MRAs. See, and this is the problem of ignorance, where I'm commenting on this right now without knowing the first fucking thing about either group. In the comments, I just point out that now I'm knowledgeable of feminism enough to know that it's a global activist movement with an academic wing as the foundation of its ideas.
Okay, here's the problem with modern feminism, is what you just said about the academic wing being behind it. The problem with the current academic wing behind modern feminism is that it spews an ideology it's just awful. It's just completely not based in any sort of science and any sort of fact. And when you have that thing driving feminism around the world, do you think that's going to help the women who are actually suffering from sexism? Do you think that's going to help them one bit? And just one thing I want to note. Because he's talking about the actual true inequality that women face in many countries around the world today, I notice how he's never brought up Islam as one of the main driving factors behind that. Now, it is true that not every society that's legitimately patriarchal in the world today is so because of Islam. That's true. But I would say most of them, the hateful misogynistic ideology is fueled by Islam. But no, he's not bringing up that Islam is behind it, because oh my god, you're gonna be Islamophobic. Well, yeah, I don't like the ideology of Islam. That doesn't mean that I don't like Muslims. It's fine to criticize the ideology of Islam and how misogynistic it really is. But no, he's got to just kind of skirt around that because that doesn't fit the narrative.
Working to redress issues immiserating everyone. And I understand the men's rights movement is, aside from a few pro-feminist groups, a conglomerate of mostly irrelevant online groups propagandizing with anti-feminist contrarianism, ignorant of everything they refuse to shut up about.
So, feminists definitely have some validity, is what you're saying. But no, men's rights activists, no way. Let's just push them out of the way. Because somehow men's rights activists aren't relevant at all. Now, when you're talking about the online people just pushing anything that they don't like that's associated with feminism out of the way, that's largely inaccurate when it comes to men's rights activists. Most men's rights activists actually want to fight for men's rights, and the only reason they're really anti-feminist is because they see what feminism has become. But it's true that there are some people like the ones you described, MGTOW, and by the way, hashtag not all MGTOW, it's just that that's where the real sexists seem to come from. But otherwise, I would say that the men's rights movement is much less corrupted by regressive ideologies than the current feminism movement, and it's much less popular than the current feminism movement as well. So again, you're just showing your ignorance when it comes to men's men's rights movement. Again, this is based on the premise that men absolutely don't have any rights issues in the West at all. And maybe you could make this point when it comes to the countries in which women truly are oppressed. Yeah, like I'm sure the men don't have that many rights issues there, except maybe like circumcision or something. But then again, in countries where women aren't treated fairly, the women probably undergo genital mutilation as well. Anyway, like I could understand if you're making this point about countries in which women are truly oppressed, but it doesn't apply in the West. And there are plenty of reasonable men's rights activists out there. Again, you're shutting yourself down to them.
I've never seen a critique of feminism from them that had more merit than feminists' own progressive, constructive criticisms to build the movement up rather than tear it down.
Right, because feminists always make good arguments, and men's rights activists never do. I mean, do you see how one-sided this argument is?
Anti-feminists operate from the assumption we've largely reached equality based on ignoring the social sphere, while feminists just, are activists listening to other activists, taking their cues from experts in the relevant fields.
And how do you know that men's rights activists can be doing the same thing? Again, you're making so many assumptions about men's rights activists, and they're all bad assumptions, but all the assumptions you're making about feminists are good assumptions. So why is it that all feminists are good and all men's rights activists are bad, according to you?
Operating with a basic understanding of reality. Like biologists versus creationists.
Oh my god. Biologists versus creationists. Like I said, feminism is much more corrupted by regressive and false ideologies than men's rights activism currently is. And that doesn't mean men's rights activism has its own problems when it comes to the crazy extremists. Of course it does. But again, what is wrong with men's rights activism is the question I'm trying to ask. Why shouldn't there be men's rights activism? What is bad about men's rights activism? And you could say, okay, well, here's what's wrong with it, and point to the extremists, sure, but I could do the exact same with feminism, and I bet you anything, I'd find a lot more extreme crazy feminists than you would find extreme crazy MRAs. You're basically saying that it's biologists versus creationists is because feminists believe the truth. They believe going off of science, and MRAs don't. When actually, it's more like the other way around. The feminists believe all these crazy beliefs, and MRAs actually go off of the legal rights that men don't have. Again, this whole argument, and a lot of feminists make this, is based on the premise that women are still oppressed in the West, and men absolutely have no rights issues at all.
The fact that I treated the two as different sides of the same coin is embarrassing.
They should be different sides of the same coin. And like I said, they aren't always that, because most MRAs tend to be anti-feminist, and most feminists tend to be anti-MRAs. But they really should be. They're both fighting for gender rights activism, just focusing on a different perspective of it. And I think they should work together for men's rights and women's rights. So they are really two sides of the same coin. Now again, that's more in theory. In practice, they really are. In practice, they really oppose each other. In practice, feminism is not fighting for women's rights remotely. But you just have come to the conclusion that feminism is just way better than men's rights activism on all levels. And maybe you would have some point to that if you were actually focusing on issues women face around the world. Yeah, if you look at the entire world and how women are treated in some countries there, I would argue that, yeah, women definitely do need a lot of feminism, a lot of women's rights activism, but not in the West, not in the West. In fact, I would say men's rights activism is needed more in the West than feminism is needed.
When I would talk about being a humanist, I didn't even realize that what I actually meant was feminism.
No, see, this is the mistake that you guys keep making. You say that humanists and feminists are the same thing. Okay, then why does feminism only focus on women's rights then?
I think this passage out of Modern Misogyny, Anti-Feminism in a Post-Feminist Era by Kristen J. Anderson is especially relevant. This false but persistent view of feminists as man-haters is so strong, in fact, that it actually prevents people from correctly identifying themselves as feminists.
Well, that stereotype of feminists being man-haters didn't come out of nowhere, especially with modern-day feminism. Modern-day feminism, again, barely talks about women's rights, but talks all the time about toxic masculinity, rape culture, and how we should teach boys not to rape. How is that not man-hating? How is that not sexist against men? And of course, there will always be unfair stereotypes. Of course, there are feminists who don't act that way, but they didn't just pop out of nowhere. The reason why most people are not identifying as feminists is because feminism has turned into such a bad ideology, and because men have rights issues too. If women had a lot of rights issues and men didn't have any, and feminism hadn't turned into this crazy bigoted ideology, I probably would consider myself a feminist, but I don't, because, again, men have rights that need fighting for, and modern-day feminism is just a complete and utter joke.
Individuals surveyed about feminism and feminists revealed that they actually hold neutral to positive attitudes about both feminist ideals and the people who identify with these ideals. We've seen that there's no empirical evidence whatsoever to support the notion that feminist attitudes towards men are more negative than non-feminists. In fact, empirical studies on the topic find that feminists report lower levels of hostility towards men than non-feminists.
Yeah, there is empirical evidence. Just look at the ideologies that many popular feminists profess now. Now, I'm not saying that you can be a non-feminist and still be sexist against men. Of course you can. But the whole ideology of contemporary feminism is that it's sexist against men. And that's one of the major issues I have. It's very, very sexist. I would argue it's sexist against women as well, because it infantilizes them.
Anti-feminists accuse feminists of gender oppositionality, of fighting a gender war. But anti-feminists, not feminists, are the ones who believe that women and men are fundamentally different and that their difference is grounded in nature, suggesting that this is normal or even ideal.
Wait, so okay, he's reading off of an article, I'm assuming, but he's basically saying that he agrees with these beliefs. Anyway, he's saying that anti-feminists supposedly claim that women and men are fundamentally different and so therefore they should occupy traditional gender roles. What? No. And besides, you just said minutes ago in your video that women and men are fundamentally different, so it makes sense to give women things like longer parenting leave and more care when it comes to childbirth and child rearing. Now you're going back and you're saying, no, women and men are the same, so which one is it? And again, anti-feminist just means that you're not a feminist. That doesn't mean that you think that women and men should conform to traditional gender roles. I certainly don't. Only crazy sexist extremists believe that. Most anti-feminists do not believe that. Anti-feminist means that you just don't like modern feminism.
Feminists tend to see women and men as not very different from each other, and this is threatening to the gender status quo. If, as feminism argues, women can do what previously only men were thought to be able to do, then you can see how some would perceive manhood as under assault and the perpetrator of the assault as feminism.
Nobody sees it as assault on masculinity. In fact, they see it as assault partially on women, because it infantilizes them, but also on men, because the modern feminist ideology is very sexist against men.
Manhood is exclusionary, and to the extent that men's activities can be performed by women, it is no longer a special role.
And I thought you said that feminists didn't hate men, though. But manhood is exclusionary. Oh, but, womanhood is very inclusive and cool, and, it's not bad, you guys. Manhood, that's the bad one.
No longer male. If women can perform the men's role, it must mean neither the qualities nor the role are so special after all. Tom Digby observes that the mutual hostility between men and women, rooted in exaggerated gender differences, often oppressive social and economic roles, and the systemic domination of women by men, is the established context that predated and gave rise to feminism. So feminism can hardly be responsible for it. In fact, many feminists argue that generalized anti-male sentiment is contrary to feminism precisely because it replicates the bipolar gender oppositionality that has been crucial to male domination.
Wait, I'm really confused here. So you're saying, okay, feminists don't hate men. Oh, those feminists hate men? Well, they're not real feminists. In fact, hating men is anti-feminist because it makes men aggressive and bad. What?
I mean, shit. Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates.
Everyday sexism. I'm sorry, but these people just have such little problems. They're like, oh my god, sexism is just, it still exists, but it's such a small thing. It's just like a little everyday thing. Okay, if it's just a little everyday thing, then why are you complaining about it? Why is it so bad? Again, these people are trying to compare words that they willfully misinterpret to actual sexism that women face in many countries.
The very beginning of Chapter 10, What About Men, is, some people tweet using the hashtag #KillAllMen. I hate it. It's offensive, distasteful, and not conducive to progress, particularly when used by those who identify themselves as feminists. It doesn't matter if you choose to describe it as ironic. We wouldn't accept that as an excuse for a trending kill-all-women hashtag.
I agree, actually. It's stupid, and it makes modern-day feminism look bad. But again, that's not like the kill-all-men people are some small minority. No, there are plenty of feminists who say anti-man stuff. In fact, that's the mainstream ideology of feminism, that men are somehow inherently bad.
It's frustrating when people bring up this hashtag in discussions about feminism and use it to criticize all feminists, like it's proof that we really do hate men or are trying to take over the world, style.
No, people don't criticize that hashtag. They criticize the ideology of feminism, which says very sexist things about men. Nobody argues that women are trying to take over the world. Who argues that? Literally no one.
It's annoying to be automatically discounted on the basis of something you'd never support or subscribe to.
I completely agree. You shouldn't be judged on something that you don't support, which means that we shouldn't be talking about toxic masculinity or all men being potential rapists, because that does the exact same thing with men.
So I am, by the same token, extremely sensitive to the unproductive tarring of all men with a single brush. The idea that roughly half the world's population exhibits the same strengths and flaws, behaviors, and beliefs is the ridiculous notion I spend most of my time debunking and combating on behalf of women. I'm certainly not going to advocate its application to men.
Both sides have their extreme elements. One that says that we should castrate all men.
The idea of the man-hating feminist is a myth.
How is that a myth when there are actual feminists who hate men? How is that a myth when feminists talk all the time about toxic masculinity and rape culture being perpetuated by men, and ignore things like the rape culture within prisons because it happens to men, when they ignore things like men being raped or domestically abused by women because it doesn't fit their narrative? How is that not hating men? How is that not sexist against men?
It's a whole chapter of the book.
And I generally agree with that idea that in a war, there's no winner. There's only casualties on both sides.
At best, what I just said equates men getting their feelings hurt, by and large anyway, by just being reactionary dipshits who don't understand what the fuck they're listening to when feminists try and critique sexist systems, and they take it as a personal attack against men, with women's real issues surrounding the world. And not just women's issues, but the issues of all marginalized groups surrounding the world.
Again, you're talking about feminism around the world. And I don't have much of a problem with feminism around the world that's fighting for actual women's rights. What I have a problem with is contemporary, modern-day feminism in the West that does not fight for women's rights, and that actually does hate men. And you're saying that feminism isn't just about women's rights around the world, it's also about the rights of other marginalized groups around the world. No! Stop trying to bring every single minority group so that you can virtue signal and feel good about it. Feminism is supposed to be about women's rights, so only focus on that, not saying, oh yeah, feminism is also about black people's rights too. No, that's just so random.
And all the... I didn't know shit about fuck all, and yet I'm sitting here making judgments about things I just don't know anything about.
Actually, you do seem way more rational back then. So no, it wasn't that you didn't know anything about those things, it was that you hadn't been brainwashed yet.
And I prefer to not take a side, but instead help both sides to come together, mediate with them, and maybe we can work together or at least come to some mutual understanding.
That's a very good point that you made in that recording. Because feminists and MRAs don't necessarily have to oppose each other, it's actually a very good thing to try and unite them so that they're actually working for the rights of both genders. But no, you're just going to refute that point and say that's somehow not rational.
That right there, those two words, mutual understanding. Reactionaries against evidenced and well-vetted social sciences are the only ones in this equation who have understanding to do.
Again, you're saying that the feminists are right, the feminists are correct. But no, all those MRAs, no, they're just silly reactionaries who are going against social sciences. First of all, social sciences are not hard sciences, and unfortunately they've been manipulated in recent times to fit the social justice narrative. That's where we get the all-white people are racist and black people can't be racist ideologies. That's where we get the implicit bias ideology. That's where we get those ideologies from, and those ideologies have no basis in actual science. They're just sociological terms that people have used to fit their narrative. I'm not trying to, rip on sociology, just sad that it's been corrupted so much. But again, you're acting like that's a real science and that you should just believe that without question. All the MRAs, oh no, they're just reactionaries. It's not like the feminists who are being irrational. It's not like the feminists are the ones going against science and actual biological evidence and legal evidence when it comes to men's rights versus women's rights.
No matter their side. But you'll find one side, as a group, does that, and the other doesn't.
Again, where's your proof for this? You just say these statements and expect everybody to believe them. Really, it's actually the feminists who are more of a problem. How do you not see this? How do you not see people like Lacey Green and Francesca Ramsey spewing hatred and misconceptions and propaganda?
The problem here, of course, being to treat both sides as needing to mutually understand each other when one side is purposely misunderstanding and misrepresenting the other from ignorance.
Again, where's your proof for this? You are providing no proof that MRAs are worse than feminists. In fact, I would say most of them are better than most feminists.
There's one half of this equation that's being given an unfair responsibility for the other misunderstanding them, as if we have responsibility to do their learning for them, as if it's our fault that they are not understanding us when they're purposely not understanding us. It's treating their purposeful ignorance as equivalent to just being ignorant because we aren't good at making our case. When you purposely ignore the case being well made where it is, when you don't read articles on these topics, when you avoid doing that, that's your choice.
But the division between MRAs and feminists is just arbitrary, in my opinion. Not only that, but it's counterproductive, because all it is doing is reinforcing the same thing that they don't seem to like. Under the assumption that either of them is just sexually egalitarian, then dividing themselves in that way only further establishes that same fence of gender that they both seem to want to break down.
Again, you're making a very good point in that recording. MRAs and feminists shouldn't be against each other. They should be fighting for the same thing because they both want rights for both genders.
And this is one of the biggest problems I see, is that people who don't know either group, they don't have an accurate reality-based appraisal of either group, are presuming to judge them as being equal. The false equivalence, putting responsibility on both of them for opposing each other when you have one that's a group of reactionaries that are the root of the opposition.
You actually are correct in describing the situation, but you've got the sides mixed up. It's not the MRAs who are causing the problem. It's the feminists are. It's the feminists who are the root of the opposition.
Feminists and MRAs often get a finger wagging for mutual tribalism, despite the fact that anti-feminists literally have it as part of what they are, that they are a tribe, that they have made themselves against feminists.
You're conflating MRAs with anti-feminists. Not all anti-feminists are MRAs. How do you not understand this? Again, this is everyone who doesn't agree with me is an MRA.
While feminists are just a group that have made themselves to try and, promote progressive change as a social movement.
How is modern feminism, by any stretch of the imagination, progressive? If it's so progressive, why does it argue for literally segregating people by race in college, or for trying to fine somebody a larger amount of money for not using the right pronoun? How is that progressive in any way possible?
For, humanity, it's a humanist thing. It's not regressive the way that anti-feminism is. But because I don't know the first thing about what I'm talking about, I'm equating the two.
But men have more problems, but women have more problems, but we all have fucking problems. Can we please all come together, pool our resources a little, and thereby try to actually find solutions to these issues instead of he said, she said, fighting constantly, not solving any fucking issues, but just arguing.
And again, you're making perfect sense in this recording. I'm starting to think that you're a bit like Steve Shives. You were actually a rational skeptic until you got brainwashed. I agree that MRAs and feminists shouldn't be fighting because that does distract from the actual problems that they set out to solve.
See, more bullshit. I call out both sides because I equate a minuscule marginalized portion of feminism to the reactionary behavior that characterizes anti-feminism itself. One is an anomaly and the other is the rule.
So you're saying that feminism are the marginalized ones. I mean, how out of touch of reality are you? Don't you realize that feminism is controlling much of the mainstream leftist media, and it makes liberals look bad, as well as women and whatever groups they claim to fight for look bad? How do you not realize this? How do you not realize that MRAs are actually by far the minority in this situation?
But I didn't know enough about either to see that stark difference.
Yes, that is true. But again, you've got the two sides mixed up.
And that, right there, is why anti-feminists were able to start pulling me down the rabbit hole.
No, I'm pretty sure it's the feminists who've pulled you down the rabbit hole, buddy. So that was the end of this very cringy video from Varmit Coyote. Again, he has the whole situation flipped in his mind. To him, the feminists who he supports are the victims, and the MRAs are somehow the mainstream. And by the way, I did want to correct something when I was recording. I was saying about MGTOW. I do realize that MGTOW are kind of separate from MRAs. They sort of do try and separate themselves from MRAs. I think a lot of them hate MRAs because they think that what they're doing is useless. But even so, the MGTOW extremists who I'm referring to, they are people who do eventually end up associated with MRAs, and so they are kind of the extremist portion of that sort of group. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.
Feel the funk blast.